679. 679. God forgave my sin in Jesus' name. I've been born again in Jesus' name. And in Jesus' name I come to you to share His love as He told me to. He said, freely, freely you have received. Freely, freely give. Go in my name, and because you believe, others will know that I live. All power is given in Jesus' name, in earth and heaven, in Jesus' name, and in Jesus' name I come to you to share His love as He told me to. He said, freely, freely you have received. Freely, freely give. Go in my name, and because you believe, others will know that I live.
So many of you probably know Brother Todd Boone, runs Boone Restoration out of Englewood. Well, Brad was employed with Todd through their process of making decisions, and Todd and Connie were very supportive of Brad's. You know, some employers probably wouldn't have been that way. Ask Todd to have open.
Heavenly Father, what a privilege it is that we can come here today, can hear your message. Father, we thank you for the word today. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for his shed blood. Thank you that we have life through him. And Father, as we sang, freely you have given us, freely you have, that we have received, and Lord, may that be our heart that we freely give. Help us, Lord, to have a heart for all people, pray that we would have a heart for those that just need you, Father. We need you. And so just help us, Lord, to just, as you direct us, as you guide us, as you bring people in our path, may we just be willing to help in whatever direction you call us. Father, just want to pray a blessing upon Brad and Crystal and their family and just the work that you're doing through them. Just continue to go with them, bless them. Be with Brad today as he just shares with us his ministry there in Honduras, and just continue to go with them. And we just pray that you would get the glory in all that we do and say, and we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. It is always it's a homecoming, really, for us to come back to Cornerstone. Dad said 6 or 7 years. It's been almost 9 since we moved away from here. So it's been 10, 11, 12 since we've been starting the momentum that direction. So it's been quite a while now, and Cornerstone through all of that time has always been our roots, our home congregation, and the place that has most fervently and most faithfully sent us on our way and kept us in good state while we're doing it. And so you all are very special people to us. We don't get to see you all that often, but we still feel like you're very much a part of our life and very near and dear to us. And so it's a privilege for us to come back here and share a little bit about the things that we see, the people that we get to interact with, and the ways that we see God working. And I think I've said this before. The stories that I want to tell you some of them are interesting, some of them are a little funny, but ultimately it's not a story about us. It's not a story about our ministry. It's a story about God and His work and what God is doing in Honduras, which is the same thing He's doing everywhere, which is to make Himself known and expand His kingdom. And so we're glad that we get to see that in a part of the world that most of you don't get to see, but it's the same story and it's the same kingdom. Most of you here at Cornerstone know us pretty well, and even those of you who are visitors here today know us pretty well. And so I'm not going to probably give a lot of detail about, I think most of you have heard before kind of what we're doing in Honduras and the work, and I'll cover that in a little bit, but I want to spend a little bit more time today talking about the why and dive in a little deeper into why this matters. I want to tell you a little bit about the people that we're living with and serving and how they think and how the challenges that they face are impacted by, and in some cases driven by, their mindset and their way of thinking, and how that is affecting the way that we're molding and shaping our ministry there to address the needs that we see in the culture around us. But I want to start with a reflection out of Colossians. The first chapter of Colossians. I know this is a passage of Scripture that all of us are familiar with, and I'll just read it. Speaking of Christ, it says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by Him all things were created. All things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through Him and for Him." This is it's a passage we're all familiar with, and what it tells us is what we sometimes call the preeminence of Christ, that Christ is before all, that Jesus is first, that He is King of all, He is Lord of all, and everything that is by Him and is for Him. And we ourselves, our lives, are created by Him, redeemed by Him, and for His purpose. And I think that as I think about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a follower of Christ, I think this concept is probably the first and most important thing. That we as believers hold this to be true, that Jesus is first, that He's King, that He's Lord. And I think if our lives aren't driven by this truth, then maybe we've missed the point. And so part of what I'm here today to do is just to testify, really, that whatever is our lives and ministry, it's because of this. This is the foundation of all of it. And so for Crystal and I, this is our calling, that Jesus is Lord, and we want people to know that. And I know that you all feel the same way. And I think as believers, as Christians, this has to be the base. This has to be the foundation. First of all, first and foremost is Christ the Lord. And so the specifics of what that looks like is different for all of us. God, there's several verses that in Scripture, several passages that talk about the church being a body and how the body has lots of different parts. And in order for the body to function correctly, every part has to do its piece, right? And an arm is not an eye. And so it looks different. The callings that he's given each of us are different, but it's all for the same purpose, to exalt the name of Christ. So the place where we live, and we get to see that happening, is in the eastern part of Honduras. We live way out in the corner, in that eastern region of Honduras that's shaded in red, and is known as La Mosquitia. In fact, La Mosquitia is not just the eastern part of Honduras, but it also includes all of the eastern coastline of Nicaragua, which is the next country to the south. All of that land is called La Mosquitia, and it's called that because it's where the Mosquito people live. The Mosquito people are an indigenous people group that live in that part of the world. They've lived there longer than anybody. They were there before the Spaniards came and colonized Central America. They've always been there. They have their own distinct way of life. They have their own language. They have their own cultural norms and ways of thinking. And it's their territory. And so that's where we live. We live among them in their land. La Mosquitia, especially more so if we look at the Honduran side of La Mosquitia, the northern end, which is the red shaded part there on the map, it is a land of isolation and separation. And that's true on several levels, in a lot of different ways. First of all, is just simply the terrain, the geography. This is a photo looking out across the mountains that lay between La Mosquitia and the rest of Honduras. And they're not enormous mountains. There are taller mountains in the world. But they're just very, very rugged and very remote. And it's just miles and miles and miles of range after range after range. It's a hard piece of land to cross, which is part of the reason why the Spaniards never went there. That part of the world was never, that part of Central America was never colonized by the Spaniards like the rest of it was. And they just never made it out there. And so during the colonial period, the Mosquito people remained isolated from the modern world. Because the Spaniards never went and never colonized, which, looking at history, that colonization was not necessarily always a good thing. But one of the things that it did is established a common cultural base for all of those countries. They all speak Spanish. They all have that Spanish Catholic base, which has its positives and its negatives. But one of the things that it does is it brings people together. It gives them a common foundation. The Mosquito people don't have that. They were never part of that system. They don't speak Spanish. Some of them do now, but their primary language is Mosquito. It's an indigenous oral language that's not written. And so they have a whole different way of looking at life. They come at life from a different angle than the rest of their country does. And so over time, through the generations, those differences, the geographic and cultural and linguistic differences, create a divide between the Mosquito people and the rest of the world around them. And that divide just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's all kinds of prejudices that go with that. And it has come to the point now, and it has been for a while, where the Mosquito people sort of are on their own. They're generally, it's the last part of the country to get infrastructure or aid. And so they're kind of just left alone. So they're very isolated, they're very separated from the rest of their country. And that has some very, very deep impacts on their psyche and their way of thinking and their cultural identity. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a few slides. But first, I want to spend a little bit of time sharing a couple of insights into our community. These are some pictures of a friend of mine who lives in our village of Rus Rus. His name is Laston. And he's a pretty good friend that I have there. He's a little younger than me. Grew up in Nicaragua in a village just across the border. We're only about 5 miles from the Nicaraguan border, and so we have a lot of folks from there that come and visit us. And that's where he grew up. Moved up to Roos Roos, and he has a little family there. They have I think, one little girl. And this house up in the top picture was the house that he built when they first got together. And it's a fairly typical traditional Mosquito house. It's pine logs harvested from the forest there around, and a thatch roof and a dirt floor. And so that's the way they lived for several years. This picture, incidentally, the glow that you see behind the house there is not a sunset. That's a fire. It's a wildfire. And I took that picture one day because we had, during dry season every year we have fires. There's a lot of wildfires. This past year was particularly bad. And I believe this picture was actually from the year before, if I'm not mistaken. But there was a fire that had completely surrounded this house. They're kind of out on the end of the village by themselves. And the fire had gone completely around the house and was just waiting to consume it. And they weren't there. There was nobody home. They had gone to another village for a few days. And you can tell by the way those houses are built that it doesn't take much of an ember to light them up. And once they're on fire, there's no stopping it. And of course, there's no fire engines to call. And so, by the grace of God, their house did not burn down that day. It turned out okay, but everybody was pretty worried because that's a pretty precarious situation to be in. But Laston, he does some work for me. He's someone that periodically will come and ask for work. They're really hard workers, but the extent of their work experience basically is what can be done with a machete. And so they do a lot of just manual labor. I'll have them chop all the grassy area. You can see that's kind of behind our house there. There's a lot of jungle and brush and undergrowth, and that creates a habitat for snakes and mosquitoes and other things that can do us harm. And so I'll send guys back there to chop once in a while, and he's one of the guys that does that. This day he was moving some fence posts for me in the garden as we were putting up a new fence, and so he's down there sharpening my axe with a file so he can get rid of a stump. And then this house down here on the bottom is a house that he was actually working on. The picture's kind of small, but in the upper picture, off to the right of the house, you can see the beginnings, the timber frame of the new house that he was building. And so he built that house completely by hand with hand tools, hand-hewn lumber, and, well, I should take that back. It's not hand-hewn. They use a chainsaw. So he hired somebody with a chainsaw to rough cut the lumber, and then he built it by hand. Scraped together some money, asking for odd jobs from us, scraped together some money to buy tin for the roof, and this picture I took shortly after he finished his house last summer, probably. We went to have a Bible study there at his house, and I was the first one to get there, and I come up the stairs, and he's sitting there in his hammock on the front porch of the house that he just built pretty much by himself. He had a little bit of help, but he stuck with it. I mean, it took him a long time to save up the money to buy the materials and buy the nails and borrow tools. And I mean, he did it all himself. He made the doors, and he put up the roof, and he put the posts in the ground from the beginning to the end. It was his project, and he stuck with it, and he got it done. And I was just really, really impressed with the diligence. He's a guy that doesn't have a lot of family in this village like most of the other people do. He's a little bit of a loner that way because this isn't the village where he grew up. And so he didn't have as much help as some people do. And he stuck with it, and he got it done. And I was just really impressed with the work ethic that he showed. And that's a pretty traditional mosquito house. They typically build them up on posts like that. Thatch roofs are traditionally the roofing material, but now most of them are finding ways to get enough money to buy some metal. It's really thin corrugated metal, but it's better than thatch. Usually 1 or 2 rooms. They really only use them for sleeping. They spend most of the day outside. They cook outdoors in a separate kitchen. But that kind of gives you a little bit of a picture of kind of their life. That's the mosquito life. It's by day they're working manually out in the fields with a machete or maybe an axe or a shovel. And at night they're sleeping in a house just like that. So that's kind of the life. There really is there's no industry, there's no employment, and so they're subsistence farmers. They farm to live and live to farm, And that's really all that they ever hope to do. Very few of them ever leave. They don't really have the means to go anywhere. Because of the isolation in the part of the world where we live, they can't get out there's no roads that connect La Mosquitia with the rest of the country. So you literally cannot drive or get a bus or anything to get out. And so they're just kind of there and making the best of it and living their life. So most of that is basically stuff that I think most of you have heard us talk about before. And so I want to dive a little bit into the mentality and the way of thinking. And I was trying to come up with a way to do this, and I think the best way I can illustrate it is with 3 sayings that we hear from our neighbors, 3 things that they say a lot. And you know, every culture has its catchphrases and the things that we just say without thinking. And sometimes they're meaningless, but sometimes we inadvertently tip our cards, right, and show things about what we believe to be true by the sayings that we use. And I think that's the case with these 3. And I wanted to say, I'll try to remember to stop now and then and give you opportunity to ask questions if you have them. But in the meantime, feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me. I don't mind that if you have a question or if I say something that's unclear. So the 3 sayings, the first one that we hear a lot is somos pobres, which means we're poor, or I'm poor. And that's a saying that we hear all the time. People will come to our gate and ask for help with something, and very often, well, we're just poor. You know, we can't buy this thing that we need, or we can't travel. We're just poor. And they say it all the time. And it kind of gets under my skin because, in one sense, it's true. If we look strictly at economics, there are people who have no money to their name. Their houses are very basic. They don't have a balance sheet. They really don't have much in terms of material wealth. But those aren't really the things that matter the most. And the reason it gets under my skin most is because a lot of times it's used sort of as an excuse. And I don't mean that in the sense that people are being lazy, but it's a mental block. It's a phrase that represents we can't. Nothing can be done. And it really is a limitation. Another phrase that we hear a lot is, and this maybe comes up a little more indirectly, but it's a mentality that is very present, is that we're forgotten. Nobody cares about us. And I hear people, this is part of their cultural identity. You sit down with a Mosquito person and you ask them, what does it mean to be Mosquito? And this is part of it. This is part of what it means to be from that people group, is that you're forgotten and abandoned and nobody cares. And again, there is some basis for that. I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I could talk for a long time about all of the things, all of the injustices that happen to them in terms of people not helping them. The government doesn't really want anything to do with them. They don't get the resources they need. They don't have roads. They don't have schools. They don't have hospitals. They don't have basic services that you would expect a government to provide. Honduras, on the whole, is a very impoverished country, right? So the government of Honduras often lacks the resources to do what they need to do. And on top of that, there's a lot of corruption that swallows up those resources when they're available. But La Mosquitia is the extreme case. They're the worst off. When aid comes to Honduras, the biggest chunk of it goes in the politicians' pockets, and then some of it gets distributed, and the people in La Mosquitia are usually the last on the list, and there's very little left by the time it gets to them. So this idea, this concept, it's not without its base. But the problem is it's become an identity. It's become who they are. And they see themselves as people who are forgotten and nobody cares, and so therefore probably not worth caring about. And unfortunately, then they take that same idea and project it onto God. If nobody cares about us, then God must not care that much either. And it's a subconscious thing, and it's kind of subtle, but it's almost ubiquitous. It's in almost everything that they do. The third saying, and this is one of those just kind of normal, common, everyday sayings, is "¿Qué vamos a hacer?" Which is, what can we do? We have a saying in our culture, it is what it is. And it kind of carries the same idea. Nothing can be done about it. It is what it is. So what? Now, in some ways, this is a strength. This is something we've learned from our neighbors in Honduran culture. They're much quicker to be content and accept things the way they are and not rail against everything that goes wrong. And in a lot of ways, we could learn a lot from that. We have a tendency to get very upset when things aren't just the way we want them, or when the concrete pump explodes in our truck, right? Like we heard about in Sunday school. I guess not all of you were in there, but when things go wrong, we tend to get angry. And so there's something we could learn from this, right? What are we going to do about it? Well, nothing, so let's make the best of it. But it also, in the context that we see, the people around us, we see this kind of mentality being used a lot when there actually is quite a bit that could be done. There's a lot of things that could be done to make this situation better, and since we're poor and we're forgotten and there's nothing we can do, then we don't even try. And so it just we just continue in the same cycle, and we live in poverty because that's just who we are, and it's not really ever going to change. So why should I bother? So those are three things that we see, three things that people say that, in my mind, kind of illustrate the cross-cultural challenges that make it difficult for us to do meaningful ministry. And I don't want to be negative and say that, these are terrible problems and it make it impossible to do anything good, because that's not true. There's lots of really good people with optimistic outlooks, and there's lots of opportunity to do good and help people. But I just wanted to give a little bit of an insight into kind of a little bit of the cultural mentality and what we see, because it does have an impact on, and you'll see this a little bit later, it has an impact on how we decide to go and help people. The way in which we enter into a culture, we can't just go in as Americans and bring in our American pre-made solutions and plop it down on the table and expect things to get better. That just doesn't work. There's decades of missionaries failing in their ministry, or other humanitarian works failing in their efforts because of that very thing. They walk in with a pre-made solution that works great here, but it just doesn't work if you just try to export that into another culture. And so in order to be effective and bring about long-term change and ultimately bring people to a closer knowledge of God through Christ, we have to reach them in a culturally appropriate context. So that's kind of the point that I'm getting to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing and why I think it matters. And I'll start with just a brief introduction to who we are as an organization. I think most of you are roughly familiar with Missionary Air Group. We've been talking about them for a few years now. Missionary Air Group exists as an organization. The purpose that we have is that we use airplanes to bring things that people need, like medical care and relief and other kinds of ministry, people and materials and all of that stuff, to people who live in places that are hard to get to, with the purpose of showing compassion and following the example of Jesus and bringing them to the Lord. We often say that compassion is a bridge across which a credible gospel can travel. When you show compassion to someone, you gain credibility. You show them that you mean what you say, and this message that I have for you is it's about you. It's not just about me trying to convert you to be like me. And so that's kind of the model that we use, is to go and show compassion, and through that compassion, demonstrate the love of God, and through that demonstration of God's love, to draw people into that love and bring them to know the Lord. The truth is, the culture that we work in is a very a pretty thoroughly churched culture. And I have to be careful about how I say this. I don't mean that everybody knows the Lord and everything's fine, but there are lots of churches and there have been missionaries in that area for a long time. The issue that we see is that there's very, very little real relationship with God and walking in faith and the fruit of the Spirit working in people's lives. The sense of the gospel that they understand is mostly do what your preacher tells you to do, and if you do a good enough job, then maybe you'll get to heaven. That's kind of the gospel that is often presented. And so it's very, very flawed at its core. And so there's an enormous need for the presentation of the gospel in its real sense, the gospel of grace. And so there's a lot of opportunity there for showing people the way to Jesus, even though it's not really an unreached people group. It's still a people group with a very limited knowledge of God. So the way that we carry out this mission in Honduras is through three primary programs. We have the aeromedical program, which is using the airplane to fly medical patients. I described a little bit about how isolated La Mosquitia is from the rest of the country, that there aren't roads. And so when someone in that area has some kind of a medical emergency, the hospital, there's one hospital, and it's severely understaffed and under-equipped. And so, if all you need is a cast on your arm, they can probably take care of you. But if you need a surgery, especially if it's anything very specialized, they just don't have what it takes to do that surgery. And so you have to go to the city. Well, getting to the city is not an easy proposition when there's not a road that goes there. And so the majority of the flights that we do are taking people from the hospital in Puerto Lempira, which is kind of the regional capital, flying them to the capital city where they can go to the university hospital and get surgery. A lot of them are children. This is a little boy who lives in a community about an hour and a half north of us, and it's a farming community. They're ranchers. They have cattle and raise grain, and he was out helping his dad round up cattle, riding on a horse, and the concept of child labor laws is pretty much non-existent. As soon as you're old enough to carry a machete, you're using it. And so he was probably too small to be riding on a horse, especially rounding up cattle on a horse. But anyway, he fell off and broke his arm. And pretty severely, he needed hardware. And, he needed pins or plates or whatever it was. Well, the hospital out there doesn't have anything like that on hand. And so they had to send him into the city. The issue is the healthcare system is operated by the government. And so it's supposed to be free to Honduran citizens. It's not always exactly free, but it's pretty low cost. The issue is a surgery like this one that's, a broken bone like that, there's a good chance if he would have just gone to the hospital and walked in the door that he wouldn't have gotten surgery for 2 or 3 or 4 months. There was a case of a elderly mother of someone that we knew who got hit by a motorcycle and broke her femur, which is the big bone here in your leg. And they took her to the city, and I think she waited 3 weeks to get a surgery with a broken femur, which is a very painful thing to endure. And so it's a very inefficient system, and it's hard to find ways to get treatment for people. And so part of what we do, the other missionary family that's there with us, there are 2 families that we live together there in the village, and she's a nurse. And so she spends a good deal of her time coordinating treatment for people, texting people and calling people and trying to find a doctor and a hospital and the right people to get everybody together to take care of somebody who has a need. And so she was able to find someone who would take this little boy, and they got him in, did surgery on his arm, I think they put pins in. And so I flew him and his dad into San Pedro Sula, and they got in a taxi and went to the hospital. And a few weeks later, he was done, and we had an empty flight coming back, and we were able to bring him back home again. And so this little boy's name is Marvin, and his arm is completely healed. He's normal. And that is something that we just take for granted. Something like a broken arm. Most of us have probably had kids with broken bones. That's a fairly normal thing. And I doubt if any of us have ever stopped to think that this might ruin my kid's life. He might not ever recover from this. None of us think that. It's an inconvenience, really. It's hard to see your kids in pain, and it's an inconvenience to have to take time and go to the hospital, and It might be expensive, but we all know that we'll get through it. But in this context, that's not the case. I've seen people walking around with their arm flopping from here down, just loose, flying around, because they broke it and they never got it treated because there was nothing available. And so if that had been the case for Marvin, he would have never been able to work. This is a very labor-intensive way to live. If you can't work in the field, then you don't eat. And so if he would have had an arm that was loose and floppy, he wouldn't have been able to work, wouldn't have been able to farm, and so who knows what, he probably would have been a beggar for the rest of his life. And so a little thing like that can make a huge difference. And the fact that we had the connections, we had someone available to make those connections, we had doctors who were willing to help this little boy, we had the means to get him to the city, and all those things came together to restore his arm and give him a fairly normal life. And so, and he's still there. We see him and his family periodically. They come through our village on a fairly regular basis, and he's a perfectly normal little boy that runs and does everything that boys do. Not all the flights that we do with the airplane are medical flights. This picture at the top left is a group of pastors that have been coming down to La Mosquitia a little further north of us on the Patuca River. There's a whole line of villages along that river, and they go out and do, they are supporting indigenous churches that are along that river. So they're going out and helping pastors, doing some training, doing some preaching. And so we've been flying them back and forth several times a year for the past several years. They're not part of Missionary Air Group. They're with a different organization from a church actually in North Carolina is who's sending them. But it's an example of a way that we have an opportunity to use the airplane to also further other ministry work in that region. We are two families, so there's what we can do is a pretty small, a pretty small pile of things that we get to do. But there's lots of other people with lots of good work and ministry that the Mosquito people can benefit from, but they have to have a way to get there, and so the airplane serves their needs as well. I got to be pizza delivery guy one day. This was after our a big medical event we had in February, and we were running hard all week long. Everybody was pooped. We had 820-some patients, I think, for the week. And so we were all tired. Nobody wanted to cook supper. And so I flew the last group of doctors home. And it's pretty common when we go to the city, take a patient or whatever, and go to the city, that we get from our wives a list of groceries to bring home. And sometimes the list can get pretty long. That day, all it was just bring us pizza. Just bring pizza so we can get through supper. So we don't make special runs to the city just to get pizza, but it worked out that day, and that was kind of fun. But the reality is there are a lot of things that we do have to fly in, but we can't get out where we are. And so we go to the city and get materials and things that we need to be able to carry out the ministry that we're doing. So that's the aeromedical program. That's kind of the tip of the spear. We're called Missionary Air Group, so airplanes are that's kind of the defining characteristic. But the airplane really is just a tool. It's not. It's just a thing that we can use to further the kingdom. Another tool that we have is the clinic, which is called the Roos Hospital for historical reasons. It's really not a hospital in its current form. But it is one of the nicest medical facilities in La Mosquitia in terms of the building itself. It's a really nice building, really nice clinic, but we're not using nearly all of its capacity. We have one nurse that's full-time, and she sees patients every day. We probably have 150 to 200 patients a month, and they're very simple, basic things. I mean, people with headaches and colds, and we're given a lot of Tylenol and vitamins and parasites, a lot of parasite-related things. So it's very simple, just kind of daily care stuff. But a couple of times a year, we'll bring in a team of doctors, and we'll have 20 or 25 people that descend on Roos, and then about 700 or 800 or 900 people who come to be seen. And that's really when the majority of it happens. Of course, the doctors get flown in. The patients come walking. Some of them will walk more than a day sometimes to get there through the jungle. We have a dental clinic, A lot of teeth get pulled out. There's not a lot of care that is given beyond pulling teeth. In fact, the mosquito word for dentist, the literal interpretation of it is teeth puller. That's how they describe a dentist. It's someone who pulls out your teeth. Because for the majority of them, that's the only treatment they ever get. They don't come out of the jungle until it's so bad they can't stand it, and then by that time it's too late to do anything for it. And so they come and we spend all week pulling teeth. But that's something that we're starting to see a change. And one of the things we're trying to do with the hospital, with our clinic, is to try to put more of an emphasis on preventive care and education. Get people to learn how to take care of themselves so that they're not waiting until they're too late to be, where it's too late to address the issue before they come. And we're starting to see a change. This past year, we had a dentist come for our brigade in February, and she came a little bit early, had a little longer time there, and she was able to spend several days doing some fillings and some cleanings and some things like that we never had time before to do. And so the fact that people are seeking that treatment and their mouth is healthy enough to even consider doing that kind of thing is a step in the right direction. It's a sign, I think, that we're moving in the right direction, at least for our community. And so our emphasis with the clinic really is to try to move more towards that direction. We have a couple of different educational kind of initiatives that are going to teach people the importance of hygiene and taking care of their own bodies so that they are healthier in general and we're not dealing with crises all the time. I think that's everything for the Roosters Hospital for now. The third program, so we have the aeromedical flight program, the clinic, and then the third area of ministry is training and evangelism. And this is really the area that we're really hoping to enlarge and expand. This is where we see the biggest opportunity for long-term change. People can come to us in their crisis, and there will always be crises. There will always be people around us who have desperate needs. But our hope is to get to a point where we're caught up with the crises enough that we can sit people down and start teaching them things that can make their life better. Pastoral training has always been one of those areas. Many of the pastors in the local churches almost all of them are Mosquito people, indigenous people. They grew up without much education. The school system is very dysfunctional. Most of the kids in our village, I think, are probably doing well if they get 2 or 3 years of education. And even at that, it's not a very good quality education. And that's general education. Bible education is a similar kind of story. Most of the families really aren't teaching their children the Bible at home. They don't really have they don't have much of a family environment. Their family life is it's very, very poor. Their relationships don't last. Almost nobody gets married, and so their mother and father relationships usually last a handful of years, and then they kind of wander off to find somebody else. So most of the kids are growing up either with a single parent or with mixed families, and they really don't spend time with their kids. They don't sit down and teach their kids. They take them out to the fields to work. That's really their education. And so they're not teaching their children the Bible. And in church, the pastors of the churches then have grown up in that environment where they've never really been systematically taught the Bible. And so now they're the ones in the churches doing the teaching. And a lot of what they're saying is just repeating what they've heard other people say. It sounds nice. And so it gets pretty convoluted. And so, and then of course the next generation of pastors are growing up in that same environment, and the cycle continues. And so pastoral training is an enormous need. We can reach a lot more people by training their pastors than to try to go out and reach each one of them individually. But there's also there's a lot of other educational opportunities. We want to start doing we've already started doing some health education. We want to do some agricultural education. There's just general education with kids, like sort of after-school program kinds of things, getting kids together and just teaching them things that they're not learning in school. There's lots of those kinds of training and teaching opportunities that tend to have a longer, more sustainable impact on people's lives than just solving a crisis. And it gives them tools then to make their life better in the long term. One of the ways that we've seen that lately is we held a marriage conference or marriage retreat in our village I think it was in May. And we were a little bit skeptical that people weren't going to be interested and they weren't going to come. But we had almost the entire village show up, at least all of the couples, the people who were together in a relationship. Almost everybody came. And they were there for 2 days, and we had their rapt attention for almost the entirety of the 2 days. They came on time, which is incredibly rare. Nothing starts on time in our community. I mean, and when I say not on time, I mean, I told somebody out here if we were in Honduras and we said it started at 2, it probably starts about 3:15. The first person to show up is probably about 2:40. Their sense of time is just different. And so, but when we did our marriage retreat, they were there at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. And they sat and listened the whole time. We played some games and did some activities, which is very out of the box for them. They're not expressive at all. They were holding hands and doing, like, we don't ever see people doing that. That's just not at all part of their culture. They're very stoic. And so we got a really, really good response. And, it was only 2 days, but we're hopeful that some seeds were planted, and we want to come back and do it again and keep repeating. This is an issue. This is a topic that we've been very deeply drawn to, I think. Since we've lived there, we've seen this is a stronghold in their culture. The quality of their family life is so poor, and it has such a deep impact on their culture, on their society, on their economy. And it's an area where the biblical principle is almost completely unknown to them. And so there's an enormous opportunity for teaching and ministry there, just teaching them what the Bible says about how God designed marriage to be and what it's for. Because nobody's teaching them that. Nobody's ever told them. And so they just continue doing what they see modeled around them by their parents and other people, which is that relationships are disposable, and if you're doing something I don't like, then you're not worthy of me anymore, and so therefore I'll kick you out. And that's the end of it. And, we see that here as well to some extent. But in this culture, it's to an extreme. And so if you think about the Mosquito people, this is one area that you can pray for. This couple in the picture on the right was another really good friend of mine named Mario, and his wife is Jomari. And they've been together for at least 12 or 13 years. And so they've stayed together longer than some people do. And they have expressed interest in getting married, actually going and doing it legally. And so we have taken on to try to help them do that. One of the challenges is the bureaucratic nature of the government, the department of the government that's responsible for handing out marriage licenses. Well, sort of. There's too many government departments to keep track of, but one of the government departments that's critical to that process is so disorganized that you can't even get the paperwork that you need. And there's so many errors that you can't. And so I've been working with a lawyer in the Capitol to help this couple get their paperwork, and we've been going at it for probably a year. And it's just one obstacle after the other. And he goes, and this document, well, it's wrong. It got written, everything, when they were born, everything was still being done by hand in a big book. And, well, they copied a number wrong, or these letters are transposed. And so then you got to go correct this document. Well, to correct that document, then you need these other documents, which nobody knows where they are. And, well, then one of them has an error, too. And so, the lawyer's just, I don't know if it'll ever get straightened out, to be honest. And so that kind of creates a complication because they really can't get married legally. And so then there's this mental block. Well, the government won't let us get married, so we can't. So one of the things we're trying to promote is to straighten out the idea that the government isn't who declares you married. Right? God invented marriage. Marriage is God's idea, not the government's idea. And all the government can do is recognize that you're married. They don't make you married. They just acknowledge that you're married. God is the one that, it's his idea. And so that's what we're trying to straighten that out and convince people to go ahead and get married before the Lord and be married. And then if it takes 15 years for the government to get their act together and give you the paperwork, so be it. But you can still honor God with your relationship. And so that's something that we're trying to, but that's a slow process. But it's an insight. I think this topic is an interesting insight because it takes us where we see an intersection between their physical and material and economic needs and their spiritual condition. Because those are two different things, but yet in so many ways they get woven together and they affect each other. And as humans, we are whole beings, body, mind, and spirit. And you can't expect someone's spiritual condition to just get better if you're not ministering to them holistically and the needs that they have. And I know that you can go off a ledge with this idea and take it too far, but it is a reality, and we see it modeled in the ministry of Jesus. When Jesus came to earth, his ministry, the visible part of his ministry for really the entirety of, I mean, he preached the gospel, but the entire time he was addressing people's physical needs. Right? He was healing the sick, and he was healing and addressing their needs. He was feeding the hungry. And so that's the model that we've taken into where we're at in Honduras, is that if we want to have the access to people's lives to speak into the spiritual needs that they have, like the situation with their relationships, with their marriages, we could never have done this if we didn't have the credibility with our community and the trust, maybe that's a better word, that they came when we invited them. And they did that because we've invited them to other events here this is in our airplane hangar. We moved the airplane out and did it in there. And we've had them there before, and we've fed them, and we've given them other things that are important to them. And not in the sense of buying their favor, but of helping them with real needs that they had. And so that enabled us to be able to bring them together to talk about a more sensitive subject that they weren't as open to talk about, because we had that trust and we had that confidence with them. And so that's part of the model of what we're doing. It's the reason that we have the clinic. It's the reason that we're flying people in the airplane. It doesn't end there. That's not, fixing someone's broken arm is fine. That's not the end, but it is a means to the end. And it's not just a means in the sense of, I'm going to do something nice for you so that you'll do what I want you to do. It's the model that we have, because that's what Jesus did. And so that's sort of the example that we're trying to follow. And that comes from, we saw that in the mission statement that I put up there in the beginning. The purpose of all of this is to show compassion and follow the example of Jesus. That really is what we're hoping to do. I'm going to take a little bit of a break here for questions. That's kind of the end of the summary, I guess, of what we're doing and why. I don't know if that's if I've answered any questions, or maybe I've created more. But does anyone have any questions or observations that you have over what we've covered so far? Okay, well, that means either I was really clear or I completely lost you. So, of course, we come here to share with you what God is doing and the opportunities that we see, and also to share with you how you can be involved, because this isn't something we can do by ourselves. Thank you. As I said, we're only two families, and so we can't do all this work alone. And so there are several ways that we need your help. The first one is we need you to pray. This is a real opportunity that you have to impact the people of Honduras and all across the world. Prayer matters. And so we ask you to be praying with us. I know that many of you are. If you're a QR code user, you can use that to sign up for our email list. That's the best way to stay up to date on how you can be praying for us and for the people that we're serving. The emails that we send out are not regular. We write them whenever we get around to it. Sometimes we're good at keeping up to date and sometimes we're not, but if you sign up there, that's the best way for you to stay informed. If you're not a QR code user, you can type it in there, or if you're more of a pen and ink kind of person, there's a paper on the table back in the corner out in the foyer. You can write your name and email there, and we'll get you on the list as well. So that's the first way. I said it's been almost 9 years ago since we moved away from here, and it's been just over 3 years ago since we moved to Roosevelt, where we're living now. And shortly after we moved there, we had a couple of guys come down from Cornerstone, and they spent, I think it was about 10 days, wasn't it, there in Roosevelt. This has been 3 years ago now. Did a little gate project that we needed to get done there at the hangar to keep the horses from destroying our airplane. But the real reason that they came wasn't for the gate. The real reason that they came was to support their missionaries. And looking back, that was, we needed their visit in ways that we didn't even understand at the time. We really needed someone to show up and just be friends. And we had just moved there. It's not an easy place to live, and we were overwhelmed, and there was a lot going on, and we felt like we were in completely over our heads. And so having those three guys come was an enormous blessing to us. It was great to have them there. And since that time, we haven't seen anybody else from Cornerstone. Now, I don't mean that. I say that with. I don't mean it as a criticism at all. I say that with as a joke, kind of. I'm not picking on you. The truth is, we haven't had great ways to have teams. We haven't had projects well laid out to have teams come and work, and it's taken us a while to get systems in place to be able to have work teams come. But we're kind of getting that figured out now. And so what I would like to invite you to do is think about coming in and working with us in Roosevelt. We have some projects now that we're working on that we would love to have some of you come and visit us and help us do some construction kinds of work, construction and maintenance mostly, which is what a lot of you guys are good at. And so if that's something that you're interested in doing, please talk to me. We'd love to see some of you come down. We've got several things for next year that we're trying to line up and get going, and I've had some really good things happening over the last couple of weeks. Some people who are signing up and getting on board, and we're ready to get some materials purchased now, and we've got the beginnings of a team for, I think, January and February, and then we're hoping to do some more in probably April or May. And we can do them in other times. Later in the year, actually in the summer, we're probably going to need some other help, maybe July, August timeframe as well of next year. So those are some opportunities for some short-term teams, but it's more than just short-term. The fact is, we also need some people for longer term as well. I know this is it's a lot harder. It's how do I say it's a lot easier almost anybody can sign up for a short-term team. It takes the right kind of person in the right stage of life and with the right calling to sign up for something longer term. But we have this need, and so I'm sharing it with you. If you or someone you know matches this description, I'd be very interested in talking to you, because we need, especially what we need right now is facilities maintenance people. What I'd really like to have is someone on staff to move to Roosevelt with us and be facilities maintenance, well, really facilities and vehicles and equipment, but just a maintenance manager. There are two of us. We're both pilots and mechanics, and we're capable of doing all the stuff that we need to do, but there's more of it really than we can do. And so I would love to have someone that can just take that load and be responsible for that portion of it. In my mind, an ideal person for that role would be maybe someone whose children have moved out of the home, someone who's maybe looking at an early retirement, or maybe someone who we have some friends who go to an orphanage in another part of Honduras. They're from Canada, and during the winter months, instead of going to Arizona or Florida for their snowbird trip, they go to Honduras and spend a few months in Honduras every winter and help the orphanage, and then go back to Canada. So they go back and forth. Of course, it doesn't have to be someone, it could be a young family or a young single person. But we really are looking for someone to fill that role. We need somebody who has some construction and maintenance experience to come and help us take care. Our campus is fairly large. We've got a bunch of buildings and several vehicles and some equipment, generators and different things, and it's a full-time job just to keep on top of things. And so that's a position we're looking to fill. We are an aviation organization, so there's always opportunities for people with that skill set as well. It's a little bit more complicated to find and prepare someone with that skill set because it's very specific and technical. But that is always open. And then medical people. We have a medical clinic there, and there's always need for people with medical skill sets. All of those categories are roles that we can that can be useful people of any term length. So we can do short-term teams. We can do, we've had some people come for a couple of months, kind of a time frame, or maybe a year, and then full-time, long-term staff. So whatever that time frame looks like, all three of those roles in maintenance and in aviation, and short-term aviation is a little bit tricky, but there can be ways to fill that as well. So I guess the point that I'm getting to is if you are someone who fits any of those descriptions, or if you know someone who does, please let me know and pray about that, because the work that we're doing isn't a work that does itself. It takes people to make it happen, and we're at a position as an organization where we're ready for a little bit of growth. We're ready for some more people to expand and be able to do the things that we want to be able to do. We really need more people, and so we would like to see that, and we would also like to see some short-term teams, especially for next year. So please consider that if any of you here at Cornerstone are interested in coming down. We're much better equipped to handle a work team now than we were when you guys came. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just kind of rolled with it, and we're not going to have a breakdown on the road in the middle of the night this time, hopefully. Okay, the third, so we need prayer, we need people. The third way, of course, that you can be involved is through financial support. None of this stuff happens for free either. These are a few of the areas that I would say are our priorities right now for financial support. Our family's personal expenses are supported out of a fund just dedicated just for that purpose. You at Cornerstone are very familiar with that. You've been very faithful at supporting our family, and we're very grateful to you for that. That enables us to be there and be on the field, and no matter what happens with the airplane or the hospital or whatever, we're there, and this congregation has always been beside us in that, and we're very grateful. Honduras Aeromedical is the name of our flight program. That's an ongoing need. The airplane is very costly to operate, and all of the medical flights that we do are done at no cost to the patient, and so it's a significant cost to be able to do that, and that cost is covered by donors, and so that's a way that you can give to support those flights. The operation of the hospital, our clinic, is another area that is an ongoing monthly operation. We're buying all of the medications, and then when we have teams. We're bringing in doctors and providing for them while they're there. So those are ongoing costs as well. And the last item on the list there is the Learning Center, which is an ongoing project. This is what we need construction teams for next year. I was just given a check for the first phase of construction on this project. So for the first phase, we have what we need to buy the materials. The project is, we have a couple of buildings behind the hospital that used to be used as part of the hospital that are not used that way anymore. And they're in very bad shape. They're not safe to be in. And so next year, our hope is to do some demolition and remodeling and make those buildings a place where we can have events like the marriage conference that we had. We want to be able to do pastoral training. We want to be able to do marriage and family training. We want to be able to do agricultural training. And these are all events where we would be bringing in people from outside to teach. There might be some that we teach ourselves, but the idea is to have a place where we can bring in people, specialists on different subjects, that we can get our community together and even people from other communities and teach them. It's also an opportunity to be more engaged with the children of our community who are not really in school that much, and so they mostly just play around the village, and we would like to be able to, Crystal especially has some ideas about creating a space for kids, kind of a library kind of an environment where we have resources for them to learn, and then activities, reading programs and science projects and all the kinds of things that all of us grew up doing and our kids grew up doing that those kids don't ever get the opportunity to do. There's opportunity for health education. We've got a couple of different organizations we're working with right now that have programs to educate people in the villages about how to care for themselves and their neighbors, just basic health care. And so there's lots of things that we want to be able to have a place to do those kinds of events. And right now we don't really. We borrow a church in the village once in a while, or we'll move the airplane out and use the hangar. But none of those are a very ideal space. And so this learning center is and I don't think I have a picture of it here, but there are 3 buildings that we're hoping to renovate. So right now, phase 1 is just the first building. And so we're wanting to get a roof on it and kind of make it secure and create that space. So there are some financial needs for that looking forward. Right now we have the first phase met in terms of the material cost, and what we're needing now is people to come and especially metalworking. It's a metal structure for the roof, so we'll be doing some welding and roofing and things like that. So we have there's opportunities there for people to come and help. You have any questions about any of that? Those are the 3, prayer of people and financial needs are the 3 ways that you all have opportunity to be involved. And are there any questions on any of that before I move on?
Can you clarify, so like for Cornerstone, the monthly support is going to the Hoblit family.
Mm-hmm.
The other 3 would be what, checks to Missionary Air Group, ear tag, one of those 3? Is that the way you prefer that?
Yeah, as far as how to give, there's another QR code if you're interested in that. But you can also, you can go to our blog and find, this just takes you to a page in our blog that describes it, but I'll tell you briefly. You can mail a check to Missionary Air Group. You can go on Missionary Air Group's website and find information about how to give. Really, those are the 2 options. All of the funds for all of these programs, all of it goes through Missionary Air Group. If you go online to the MAG website and find the donate page, there's a menu on the donation page that lists all the different funds that you can donate to, and these will all be on there. So those are all funds that are already set up on the MAG donation page. Although the Learning Center might not be there yet, actually. I'm not sure about that one. But the other 3 definitely are. Or if you want to mail a check to MAG, you can do that and just include a note with what your intention is for that. Any other questions? Okay. In conclusion, the ministry of Jesus when he came to the earth was to seal with his blood the covenant that God made to redeem all the people of the earth. And by doing that, to draw us to God. And when he did that, he came to die, to give his life and be resurrected. But he also came to teach and preach the message of the gospel and to demonstrate it with compassion. And so I strongly believe that in order for us to reach the Mosquito people that we live around, that the method to do that is the same that Jesus used, to teach and preach the message of the gospel and to demonstrate compassion. I'm not going to die for them, or if I do, it's not going to help. But I can teach and I can preach and I can show compassion. And so that is the ministry model that we use. The reality is the people of our community, it's true that they're poor in one way of looking at it. They don't have much physically. But yet the things that really matter, they have so much. They have a very strong sense of family and community. They work together. This is a picture of the ladies cooking for a Christmas dinner that we did last year. And they all came together and took all of the food and went into the school kitchen, and they worked together all morning. They know how to work together. They know how to work hard. This young fellow was doing some tilling in our garden. He was the very proud owner of a cowboy hat that someone had given him. And he was working very, very hard, as they do. They're extremely hard workers, physically. They can do physical labor like none of us can. And from a very young age, this is the daughter of our nurse who was preparing rice for that day's dinner, getting it ready to cook. And everything is very manual, very labor-intensive, but they do it, and they do it willingly. They're not lazy. They've got an incredible work ethic. They've got an incredibly strong sense of community and taking care of each other. And they have a lot of things. They've got natural resources. They've got great soil that they can grow crops in. They've got a lot of things that are to their advantage. And so in many ways that really matter, they're not poor. And so we want to challenge that. Remember, that's one of those three sayings that I brought up in the beginning. We want to challenge that notion that they're so poor that they can't be helped. We want to challenge the notion that they're forgotten, because the truth is they aren't forgotten. Many of you contributed to our Christmas gift drive, and this picture is from our Christmas party that we had last year, where we gave gifts to all the children of our village. That is a demonstration that somebody who doesn't even know you cares about you enough that they were willing to send this gift to you. This picture on the right is very special to me because my grandmother passed away almost a year and a half ago, and her good friend Velma Stahl took all of her dresses and turned them into skirts and shirts to give away and sent them down to us. And so this is a picture of Crystal handing out what used to be one of my grandmother's dresses to some of the ladies in our village. And as I open that bag, I look down at it and I see all these dresses that I remember, dresses that I recognize. These are dresses that my grandma wore. And so that was pretty special. But it took a lot of love and care to make that happen. Multiple people had to work together with loving hands to pass along those clothes. And it's a small gesture, but it communicates something that's incredibly important, which is that you're not forgotten. And I hope that if we can demonstrate that you're worth loving and you're not forgotten, we care about you, and people you don't even know care about you. And my hope is that if we can communicate that effectively, that we can convince them that God also has not forgotten about you. And the last of the three sayings is, what can we do about it? The truth of the matter is they aren't helpless. It may feel like it sometimes. I'll admit that sometimes it feels like it to me when we're pushing against the immovable wall of government bureaucracy or whatever the challenge may be. Sometimes I want to throw in the towel. It feels impossible. All of these pictures are pictures of people praying. The hope that we have and the hope that the Mosquito people have is to turn to the Lord. And that ultimately is the message that I want my life to reflect to them. That's the message that our ministry attempts to reflect to them. That your hope is found in God. And if you go to Him with whatever your trouble may be, He will provide for your need. It may not look like maybe what you want or what you expect, but in the Lord there is hope and there is help. Our motto as an organization is help and hope by air. And our goal, our deepest desire is to show people that they can turn to the Lord and they can find all the help and all the hope that they need. And so that's our purpose, that's our mission, that's our drive. And that is what all of you have been involved in helping us to accomplish. It's what we're asking you to continue to help us to accomplish. And it is what, by God's grace, we'll continue to do. Because these are people who God has made, who God loves and cares about, and who God wants to reflect. They're made in His image so that they can reflect who He is. And so, until that is perfectly true, we're going to keep working and keep watching that happen, watching the Lord work and change people's lives and bring them to Him. So thank you very much for your attention, for your time. One more, is there anybody else that has a question or something you'd like to say before we close? All right, well, if you're not jumping at the bit, I'm not going to twist your arm. So that's all I have for now. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you for coming this afternoon and hearing what we have to say. And we love you all, and God bless you.